So what is the state of Canada's digital landscape at the moment, and what should we be expecting from a national strategy in this digital world, this broader global context? The moderator of our next panel is Jerry Brown, Associate Partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Jerry's a member of the editorial board for PwC's annual Entertainment and Media Outlook, and he's also a core member of PwC's Global Center of Excellence in Publishing, and he was on the editorial board of PwC's recently released global studies on the future of the magazine and newspaper industries. Jerry's going to begin this panel with a bit of an overview and comments from the group. And I'm going to introduce the panelists, and I think you might be in a different order than I'm expecting, so I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand when I say your name. First up is John Barrack, COO and CLO of the Canadian Media Production Association, formerly the Canadian Film and Television Production Association. We also have Michael Carter, President of industry trade organization Computer Animation Studios of Ontario. We have Mark Bishop, co-founder and executive producer of Marblemedia, an innovative content creation company at the forefront of television and new media production. And Mark is also the chair of the Trade Association Interactive Ontario. Niel Lliscox. Niel is a VP of Media at CLB Media Inc., one of Canada's leading business-to-business publishers. Duncan McKie is with us. He's president and CEO of the Canadian Independent Music Association. And we also have Carolyn Wood, Executive Director of the Association of Canadian Publishers, which represents Canadian book publishers. And once again, we'll have time at the end, or I'm sure during the course of the discussion, for questions and comments from the audience. And I'll turn things over to Jerry.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much. Hopefully the mic will come on just about now. Great panel we've got here, so hopefully get a chance for lots of dialogue. We do have the microphones, as you see, at the front, and I've also got one of my colleagues watching the tweets, so if any of you wish to remain anonymous with your questions, as long as they're not scurrilous or libelous, then we'll certainly try and address them through the tweets.
What happens if they are?
We will probably pass on that.
The fun factor.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't mean to say we don't want a little controversy here. And as we're trying to develop this idea of Canada's digital strategy, I'm mindful of going to a meeting about 2 years ago in Waterloo, which led to the creation of Canada 3.0, for those of you who are familiar with that part of this whole picture. And it was one of those things where you had realized there was a great idea, and I'm trying to drive back to Toronto, trying to work out how on earth I'm going to engage a commercial partnership and an accounting firm in a totally nebulous concept, because really we had to be there, and I'm relieved to say somehow by a combination of good sense on the partner's part and a little bit of persuasive skill, that went forward. We then went forward into the digital dialogue, and I'm really pleased that we've got Bernard here with ITAC, who was very much part of that process. And now we've got the consultation process being driven by Minister Clement. I think it's important when we talk about Canada's digital strategy, and it was really brought out for me again by the panel beforehand, is there's a huge important dimension to the infrastructure part, and I know one of the panelists will be very keen on that, but we shouldn't also forget the whole cultural aspects and also the skills and transformational aspects. One of the features of our industry when we look at employment is the number of people who do actually work in this industry on projects or companies that come in from outside. And we need to make sure that our workforce is trained and skilled to be able to support those kinds of investments coming into Canada. Certainly I'm mindful that this is an extension of a long-held policy that predates Confederation. For any history buffs here, the first reference I can find to support for Canadians telling stories to Canadians is the 1842 Postal Act, which required the pre-Confederation post office to deliver Canadian content at a cheaper price than content from anywhere else in the world to Canadians. So we're following a grand tradition. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to speak for about 5 minutes representing their particular position. I do want to just remind everybody that there are some key questions in this document that the OMDC is looking to get support and answers from. So when you are thinking about your contributions, either directly or spoken, please think about what is your vision for Canada's digital future. What do you see as the biggest opportunity in the digital marketplace? What are the best practices from other jurisdictions that you've seen, either individually or as a segment representative? What are the opportunities for collaboration? And are there specific ways the public sector can help? So if you can bear those kinds of questions in mind, and the same thing to everybody here as individuals as you're thinking about the fact that you're all individually going to make a contribution, I hope. So straight over to my first panelist, John.
All right. The Canadian Media Production Association, formerly the CFDPA, represents film, television, and interactive producers, about 400 member companies across Canada. And obviously, we've just gone through a rebranding exercise which recognizes the importance of what we're dealing with here. I think the most important thing I've heard this morning, though, in all of these discussions was Virginia when she was speaking about the joy factor that we can't lose in any of these conversations. And although much of what we often talk about is very potentially dry or focus on regulatory aspects, whatever, we have to, I think, keep that in mind throughout the conversation. We're in a fun business, and it is a fun business. We're privileged to have a front row seat on what is revolutionary, and that should motivate our thinking when we're dealing with all of the other props that are necessary to get us through this next period. So with that in mind, I think what we start with from a view that obviously content is critical. Obviously, the pipes and the wire matter, but the content aspect of it, the content aspect of what we're doing is equally important. And I think early stage, when you go back to Canada 3.0, for example, that was missed and has since been added in. And I think it was very encouraging to see the government recognize that when it sort of asked its 4 key questions. That was something that I think we as an association and I think as a sector were very pleased to see. So that was all very, very positive. So where do we go with that? What does that mean for us? I think when we think about where we're at today, promise it's not me.
I think it's me.
When we sort of think about where we are today, and you talked about this early reference to the Postal Act, we're into a period where many of us as Canadians are very, very proud of our universal system of healthcare. We're very proud of it. We're proud of it. It's part of our national identity. And I think to some extent we're getting to a point, if we get this right in the next little while, where sort of the universality of broadband access will be as important to our economic health, but actually our health and well-being as a society. We're really our nation building in that sense. And yes, we're taking Canada to the world. So with that in mind, I think there are 3 sort of key things that we're focused on. First is unfettered access by Canadian content creators to Canadian audiences. And I think that's effectively net neutrality. And that becomes ever more important as we look at the media consolidation that's taking place. You look at the acquisition by Shaw, a cable company, of CanWest, content company. The opportunity for non-arm's length dealing there, for preferential treatment, is real. And we have to be very mindful of making sure that all content creators have access to the pipes and access to Canadian audiences, number one. Equally important, and sort of a corollary to this, is obviously access by Canadian international audiences to our content. We have to put in place the business systems, the smart regulation and update current systems to make sure that we can take Canada to the world. We have businesses like Marble who, we want to see them succeed not just in Canada, but by taking Canada out around the world and making Canada a real success story. That requires us, quite frankly, to really look, and you could go on at great length about this, but to really look at not just updating our current systems, which are important. We need to update the CAVCO system, the point systems. We need to make sure that our tax credit programs are open to digital content, which many provincially, thank you to the Ontario government, but we need to go beyond that federally and do more federally. That has to be a priority. We need to really look at how we define CanCon. Is that relevant as we go forward? Do what has made sense in the past make sense going forward? And what I really appreciated about the last panel, and I'd love to spend more time talking about, is how do we get private money into the system? How do we, if I might, facilitate a conversation? I mean, you say you went back to your office and had to, sort of convince people, hey, this is interesting, we got to get in here. We all need to facilitate a bridging of conversation between folks with money who really don't know us and may view us, this content sector, is a little flaky, to, no, this is a business. And there's money to be made here, and we have to, with government, create mechanisms that are going to promote private money in. the point someone made here earlier about, we've been burned in the past and government's been burned in the past. No, it can't be about making the lawyers rich and the accounting firms rich. It has to be about, money. I'm a lawyer. Relax. Exactly. I'll go back to private practice and get rich. But we have to get past the scam stage. And we have to get to the point there's real efficacy around these things, and there has to be trust, and we have to be vigilant as a sector to shut down the scammers, quite frankly. And then finally, this is very personal, we have to close the digital divide. Realistically, we are leaving a big number of kids behind. I have 3 kids, 11, 9, and 6. They each have 1 computer in their classroom, 1. And this is in a pretty good neighborhood, right? So if that's the case in my neighborhood, what's it like in the north? What's it like in smaller communities, underfunded communities? We have to, as a society, I think, step up to our responsibility, which is to educate the next workforce, because if we don't, we're left behind, and that's the only way we're going to access the world. So the very big picture, that's what's driving us.
Thank you. Well.
All right, thank you. So as was mentioned before, I'm the chair of the board of Interactive Ontario. I should also say I also sit on the board of the CMPA as well. Is my mic on? Anyone hear me?
Nobody wants
to hear me. That's fine. All right. So Interactive Ontario, just for those of you who don't know, we are a trade association, as was mentioned off the top. We represent over 200 member companies in the province of Ontario with a wide range of businesses, everything from some of the largest players in the video game industry, to mobile content creators, convergent producers, film and TV producers, web producers, e-learning, but all of our members with that focus of the business of interactive content creation. So in looking at the national digital strategy, I think my mic's on now, there are a couple of points. Some will dovetail over and just to echo what John has said before. I think first and foremost, no surprise is money and access to capital. And no surprise that money makes the world go round. But I think that access to capital, and it was talked about on the last panel as well, and that private capital opportunities are needed to help grow companies in Ontario. So that's on that side, but also looking at some of the other financial mechanisms within the digital media space that need revision, need enhancement. That things like the federal tax credit for new media needs to be created, and opening up of even things like the Ontario tax credit, which is a fantastic tax credit for interactive media. But as media continues to grow and evolve and change, certain things that our interactive content creators are creating just doesn't qualify. Things like webisodes, for example, and web-based drama series don't qualify, and they fall into a very interesting spot for our producers because they don't qualify in the film and television space. They don't qualify within the interactive space, so they really sit outside of the funding mechanisms that exist right now. Which is a challenge. The challenge whenever there is regulatory systems put in place and you have funding mechanisms which are regulated and you have an industry that's constantly evolving. And so I think we need to go back and revisit those. Co-production treaties to also include interactive and not just be limited to film and television. But I think we also have to look at some of the great steps that have been made over the past little while, and it was said on the last panel, we also have to look at those systems that are working and how do we enhance them. Things like the Canada Media Fund transformation this year to really bring up the convergent content side. Also the experimental stream, which has a deadline coming up very soon. Those are great steps. There are still challenges, and we can get into them more later, in terms of how those are set up, but I think it's a fantastic step and a move forward for our digital content creators in Canada. The OMDC with the IDM fund, but it's a fantastic fund, but it's hugely oversubscribed, which clearly shows a need for funding of interactive content creators in the province of Ontario. But when only 25% of those creators are able to have their projects funded in Ontario, something's wrong and we need more money in the system. Access to talent, which was talked about before, but access to talent is really key. Within our board, we have representatives from Seneca, OCAD, and then we have separate committees where we work quite aggressively within the educational community to have that dialogue between our members and between the educational institutions, and we need to spend more time and more money in that area, in the area of development of talent, attraction for talent to try and keep them here and keep them working in the interactive content creation space in Ontario and in Canada.